Hello, everyone, and welcome to FAC. My name is Cory. I'm the online campus pastor here, and I'm joined with Vanessa Siso. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Where's that name from, the background?
Oh my gosh. I'm pretty sure it's Spanish.
Okay.
Although it could be Italian as well.
Okay, there you go. Spanish or Italian.
It's definitely European.
Okay. Well, today we have, it'll be a challenging topic, but I'm grateful that we have someone who has lots of experience teaching and helping people work through their grief. Yeah, so coping with grief during the holidays. And so that's going to be our focus is, talking about grief, but also the holiday season. And so, but first I would love, for those of you who probably have never met Vanessa before, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, I can. So, hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm a registered provisional psychologist here in Calgary. I've been working in the mental health field for around 10 years, actually, in
that's good.
many different areas. Schools, hospitals, nonprofits, and some agencies. And out, like both inside and outside of the counseling room, I'm a very, very, very big advocate for grief education.
Well, so she is here to educate us. And so, and I'm on that train of like educate me, always a learner. And I think as you experience more life, you experience more grief. And it obviously makes things, life a little bit more challenging, but we want to talk about different ways that we can cope and kind of work through grief. Because grief can obviously hit you at any time, but the holidays, it can be just a little bit different. So, but before we kind of dive in, to the holiday stuff, I'd love for you to set maybe like a foundation of like, what is grief?
For sure. So I guess very simply put, we can define grief as a very natural response to a loss or change that can happen in your life. And I guess another key facet of grief is that grief is personal. And sometimes what that can mean is that grief can look very differently in every single person, and it can also be triggered by many different reasons. So, for example, when we talk about grief, sometimes we think about grief, in the classic Hollywood sense from what we see in the movies as somebody just sitting in bed, bawling their eyes out, maybe not being able to leave their houses and maybe eat food. And that's actually quite a popular reaction that we can certainly expect and see very often in counseling. However, grief can also manifest through anger and irritability. In children, we can also see regression in behavior. So like if you have a child that's recently been potty trained, they might start all of a sudden having issues, maybe wetting the bed, having night terrors, maybe all of a sudden not doing so well in school when they were prior to this experience or prior to major losses or changes in their life. Now, all of a sudden, they're maybe getting C's in classes where they were formerly getting A's. In children with developmental disabilities, we might also be seeing an increased number of tantrums, maybe even an increased difficulty in attention span and things like that.
Yep.
And you can really have just about anything.
I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, so like I think I experienced quite a lot of grief in so many different ways, and even for the obviously the tiniest of things. But I think like thinking about grief and knowing that it's not just the typical Hollywood response, and is also very important, because I think for a lot of people, like learning to recognize emotions is very challenging. Right? We just let emotions take us away. But I think, like learning to regulate emotions, I think step one is, I don't know if this is true, but like, I feel like the first step is to actually name the emotion.
Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah?
And
Okay.
I think that is actually one of the most challenging things about it. A lot of people will even manifest grief through avoidance, actually, of those emotions. So we might even see people diving into work or school a lot more because they struggle so much with even recognizing whatever emotion is coming up from that painful experience. And
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
So if you could help us understand, like, so we know that grief obviously can happen anytime,
Absolutely.
like, but today's topic, we want to talk about grief during the holidays.
Yeah.
So could you help us understand what is grief, during the holidays?
Yeah. So, I mean, grief, of course, is very tricky around the holidays, and part of the reason why is because, during this time, first of all, cultural expectations are so unbelievably high.
Okay.
If you've recently been laid off of work, gone through a divorce, or just a major life, whether it's like a life change of sorts, like lost a loved one, like the holidays is definitely going to be a time in your life where you're going to struggle maybe with putting up that merry-go-lucky smile and be that as, that joyous self that everybody tells you to be, because you've just been through maybe, not even just recently, but just in the last little while, a really hard time. And on top of that, we also see, a lot of stress happening as well, whether it's stress from gift buying for family members, or just, the hustle and bustle of getting around because there's so many people everywhere. Financial stress as well is also a really big one. On top of that, we also see some extra facets in that in recent years, we've also seen a lot of increased activity in social media. So if you've recently lost a loved one, social media can be such a difficult place to get into because you might be looking into pictures of maybe people that are hanging out with their parents, for example. And if you've recently lost a father or a mother or even a child or a loved one,
the last thing you want to see
exactly
is a happy family, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, but it's like obviously it's not bad to share happy, photos of your family, but when you're dealing with grief, like
it's extra hard.
Yeah, it's extra hard.
That. And I think that that's also something else that we struggle with is, there's also this pressure for those people that are in social media or frequent social media users or like to take pictures and post them to think like, oh my gosh, I need to be posting some happy stuff instead of just like going on social media and maybe talking about how miserable I feel or how painful this experience has been. So that's a big facet, social media in itself that perhaps we weren't seeing before in recent years. And then we also have this kind of interesting dynamic that there's also a big emphasis during the holidays on tradition and routines, right? So if there's been a big change in your life recently or a big loss and something in your routine has maybe changed, I know I was talking with my grandma this morning about what it was like for her when she became a widow. And it was so hard, the holidays, because my grandfather, he used to make the food.
Yes, whatever. Yeah,
he used
his
to,
contributions.
Get the tree out, like all the heavy lifting. So doing those things, or like going through the holidays, even years after his death, is such a difficult thing. And that happens not just to my grandma, but to a lot of people out there. And finally, I think another big piece of this is also the big emphasis that we play on just this getting together part of the holidays with friends and family. You're constantly maybe being invited to Christmas parties at work and being told that you have to bring a +1, like a loved one or something, or maybe you're seeing your friends get together with their families for Christmas dinner or for New Year's, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, this is the first year I can't go back home, for example, because I just can't afford it. That is going to be such a hard time for someone, right? So there's many different things I think that are happening during the holidays that can certainly make grief a very challenging experience to get through.
Yeah, and I think challenging experience and varying experiences, right? So and all all valid experiences, because I think sometimes, like if you're going through something and I think it's okay to recognize the grief, no matter if you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be grieving this. Well, we were talking earlier, grief can present itself in so many different ways, and even through positive experiences, right? Grief can happen, and it's a wild emotion. But I think like learning to recognize it, and we hope that today, obviously later on, we'll talk about ways and strategies that we can cope with grief, work through it, and not kind of bury it down. Or at least that's what I'm hoping for, right?
You're right on the money there.
Okay. So, is there anything else you wanted to add about grief, holidays, before we kind of get into the coping?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I would love to mention too is that there's no really handbook to this either. Like a lot of people will sometimes feel a lot of guilt during the holidays when they're grieving, because they think like, oh my gosh, like I just lost a job. This is not a big deal. Like there's people that have maybe lost a loved one, or, have recently, had to put down a pet or something like that. And like, all I did was lose a job. And the truth is that any change, any loss of any kind, like I said, grief is a personal experience for everybody. So there's really no hard or fast rule on what we, can technically experience grief for.
No hard or fast rule. Here we go.
No, there really isn't. And I see that a lot in my counseling rooms as well. Like a lot of people just experience so much guilt during the holidays because they just don't feel like they should be grieving this hard over things like, I just lost a friendship, for example, or I just went through a breakup. It's not like I've become a widow now, so it's not the same. And although, of course, like every loss is difficult, and there's no real way in which we can like compare, grief is personal, and a lot of that stuff is certainly difficult to get through, right?
Yeah. So as we move closer to our and move on in our time, coping with grief during the holidays. That's the question.
Yeah.
So I would love for you. Talk as much obviously as you would like, and share how can I cope with grief during the holidays?
Of course. So I guess if we're talking to people that are currently grieving, first of all, I just want to say how sorry I am, because I know from experience how difficult that can be. And I guess the first tip that I would give to anybody out there is to don't be afraid to reach out for help if you need it. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of people out there who've and I see this a lot in the counseling room as well. There's so many people who maybe just struggle to ask for help, and kind of come in when it's just become like really hard to bear. And really, like, one of the things that I would just love to say is, like I said, try to give yourself some grace and understand that this is a painful experience, right? And if you need help, reach out for it. Another thing that I would just love to say is, when it comes to managing grief, one of the easiest things that we can do is also seek to find ways to manage stress that's surrounding the experience. Sometimes that can make it really difficult for you to be able to slow things down, especially in the hustle and bustle of the holidays. And there's so much going on. Some people will feel like, but I just can't like sit down and really think about what I'm feeling. And the truth is that part of the reason why that happens is because there's so much happening. There's so much on their to-do list. So my advice would be, if you're reaching out for help, or if you're currently in a position in your grief where you're feeling incredibly motivated, try to find small ways to deal with those stressors, right? And ultimately, I guess, focus on the things that are within your control. Because
Good.
I think that is something that will really make a difference. A lot of people just feel it's very easy to become very powerless in the middle of grief when we think about all these things that are outside of our control. But when we maybe sit down and reflect, okay, here's all these things that maybe I can do, or maybe within my control, that is where I want to start. Another tip that I would have, and this probably sounds very simple and easy, but the truth is that it's not that simple and easy. A lot of people think that emotions are these things that you can just push down. And
Okay.
the truth is that doesn't really work like that. It's almost like putting your hand into water. You can't really push down water, just like you can't push down an emotion.
Right.
It will manifest in one way or another, And so one of the things one of the biggest tips that I can provide to anybody out there is to give yourself room to feel what you are feeling. And like I said, give yourself grace when it happens, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, whether it's resentment, or maybe even fear. Whatever it is, allow yourself room to feel it during the holidays.
That's good. Because I think the holidays can be very busy.
Yeah.
Right? There's lots going on. There are, lots of distractions. And I mean, it's a great example of like trying to push down the emotion you're feeling, putting your hand to a bucket of water. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, to me, like, doesn't sound like it works.
No,
right?
it doesn't.
Yeah.
And, when we don't deal with those external stressors, that's exactly what it's like pouring more water into that water glass. You essentially overflow. And that's why it becomes harder for you to identify what it is that you're feeling, right?
Yeah.
When you're overflowing and when you're burnt out from everything that is being thrown at you, that is probably not going to be the easiest time for you. So, yeah.
Well, I can imagine, like, you're trying to process grief and, like, whatever it may be, like, whatever you're going through, and adding more external pressures, like, it, to me, that doesn't sound like that would be super helpful. And I think that's kind of, learning to say no is a whole nother topic of, like, I'm sure, like, a whole nother topic, right? Because it's like, it's very, easy just to, saying no, boundaries, like all those fun things that if you don't have proper boundaries, I think dealing with grief can also be difficult. But it's like, how do you deal with grief and how do you even make boundaries when you're, in the midst of grief, right? Like how do you think clearly when you're in grief? Because I feel like sometimes it's really hard to do that.
Yeah, and that's where I think, it really helps to have people around you, right? That is where I think asking for help is key. When you notice yourself being blinded by the grief, which I know sadly very well can happen. I've seen it happen, to a lot of my clients, and I've seen it happen, in myself when I've struggled through grief, and it's so real. And that is where I think it's so important for us to maybe swallow that hard pill and realize that, maybe we can't do it all, right? And perhaps it's okay to take a step back and ask for help,
Yeah, ask for help, right? And I think, like, being able to communicate also that you're grieving, I think, is also important. To, like, let's say you're going through something and name your grief. If something is hard, I think letting people know that you care and trust that something is hard, helps with the grieving process of if it's, whatever it may be, maybe like, again, name your grief, being able to communicate that out, rather than, like, I don't know if secluding yourself is the right thing. Maybe for some time, some period, you need to seclude yourself, but also, like, I know that life isn't meant to be lived alone. So, as easy as it is to want to pull yourself away, like sometimes it is better to put yourself, in community so that people can love and support you. But I mean, you can, she's a psychologist, so we'll let her speak more to that. So,
that's absolutely right. I will say, in that, I always try and tell people, be graceful to yourself. If you've just been through a big loss, right? Of course, try your hardest to step out and, as wherever possible, try to take, especially during the holidays, try to take part in the few traditions that were a part of your routine that you still can, right? And if everything has changed, then use that time to create new traditions, because I think that will also allow you to maybe find some purpose, and maybe hope, perhaps not right away, but certainly, in the long term for you. And, I can talk on and on about that, but there's actually a beautiful example in the United States of a woman. She was a widow recently, and she was talking about her first holiday without her husband, and it was such a hard time for her. And she was feeling so lonely leading up to the holidays. She knew that, she wouldn't be able to spend it with her children who are now adults, and everyone was just off doing their own thing. And she kind of sat back and thought to herself, this whole time I've been sitting at home and kind of really allowing myself to feel this grief, and that is so okay. If you need to take that time, if you need some time for yourself to process that grief, do it. But one of the most beautiful things that can happen is, when we decide, okay, I'm going to allow myself to feel this, but this is not going to encapsulate my being, right? And one of the things that this woman did was that she sat back and thought to herself, what are some ways in which I can help people and use this feeling of loneliness, because I must not be the only widow out there who is alone this Christmas. And so one of the things that she did was that she went back to her church, and she actually issued a challenge to all of her brothers and sisters to go out and find a widow and invite her or him over, to their home for Christmas, and, that holiday season, she just, of course, none of this did anything to bring back her husband. That pain was still there, and perhaps it will always be there, but all of a sudden, for the first time, she found purpose, and she thought to herself, perhaps, I can use this to now connect with other people in my community who are feeling in this way, and thus a new tradition was born.
That's very cool.
You know, and sometimes one of the best things that we can do if we're struggling to get out of that bedroom is to just try to think of one person in your life who is maybe struggling too, or is maybe doing a little bit worse than you, who knows, and try to go out and help them in any way you can. And there's something really powerful that happens when we decide to live outwardly and help people in that way.
Oh, that was one of my questions that I actually wanted to ask, was how can we help others who are grieving during the holidays? But before you answer that, I just wanted to take a brief moment to let everyone know that if you have questions for Vanessa, we would love to hear them.
Absolutely, we would.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about doing, Facebook Live, being on YouTube Live, is being live in general, is that we can kind of interact with you. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat, whether, again, Facebook, YouTube, live.fbccalgary.com, whatever platform you're on, put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. So how can you help others who are grieving during the holidays?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think one of the biggest tips that I can give here is try your very, very hardest to reach out to your friends and family, especially those of them that have recently been through a loss or a hard time. Don't wait for them to reach out to you. You know, one of the main things that I also hear in counseling is so many people come to counseling because they're afraid to go to their family and friends and be a burden to them. Because they think, oh my gosh, like I lost my loved one maybe 20 years ago and I'm still grieving. And that person helped me to, you know, talk through, you know, all this pain 20 years ago. So why would I still be talking to them? They must be fed up with me. And so one of the best things that we can do is just maybe be proactive, right? Like I said, you know, with that widow, she was the one that came out and kind of issued that challenge. But, you know, if we know somebody that has recently been through a loss like that, we can also issue ourselves that challenge and kind of reach out to them, right? And you know, it's as simple as just like even sending a text message and saying like, hey, you know, I know that this is maybe the first holiday that you're experiencing or going through without your child or without a job. And I just want you to know that if you want to talk about it, I'm here. Otherwise, you know, I'm praying for you, and that's something else that that I want to encourage people to do. You know, for those that have faith or are Christian, pray for the people in your life that you know are struggling. You know, I think that prayer is just such a beautiful thing, and it really doesn't cost us anything. You know, to pray for other people. So I would say that would be my second tip, and the third tip is, I think, really, really important, and it's what happens when we sit down and talk to that person. Let's say we reach out to them and we're like, hey,
you're grieving,
yeah, you're grieving. Let's talk about this, you know? And I think that that's often the main reason, and this is something that I hear from people a lot, is I want to reach out. I have that genuineness, like a genuine disposition to help people, but I just don't know what to say. Or I don't know what to do. Like, what can I possibly do to help them? And first of all, I just want to say what a valid concern that is. But here's the thing, you know, when it comes to the grand scheme of things, the very best thing that you can do for that person is, number one, give them room to talk. Because, as I mentioned before, a lot of people are afraid to ask for help, are afraid to talk about what's really going on in their lives. So they've been bottling this up, you know, perhaps even from their own spouses or their own family members who they know are also grieving because they don't want to burden them too. So really allowing them that space to just sit there. And also, you know, when you sit there, another tip, like I said, grief is personal, right? There's many, many different ways in which grief can look and sound. So one of the very worst things that we can do is perhaps that response and say, well, you shouldn't
downplay the grief.
Exactly. Like, why are you so angry? You shouldn't
why are you
be
upset?
angry. Don't do that to yourself. Or why are you still crying? Stop crying. You know, get over yourself. And you know, these are not necessarily the statements that will make somebody want to continue open up with you. So that's definitely a very, very big piece. And you know, the very last thing that I will talk about, too, that's very important when you're having a conversation with somebody who is grieving is try your very best to avoid the urge to fix their problems. This is so big, you know, and I speak of that from experience, you know. As a psychologist, you know, it can be very easy for me to sit down with somebody who's struggling and say, okay, here's all that you can do to solve your problems. But the truth is that very rarely do people actually want that. And it sounds weird, but the truth is that oftentimes what people really need is to just be listened to and maybe feel validated in the place and time where they're at. And perhaps just need to hear that, you know, whatever they're feeling, whatever they're going through, it is completely okay. There is no rush for you to maybe, you know, walk through. Like, there's no, like, as I said earlier, like, there's no manual. There's no 10-step program to go through grief, right? So kind of telling somebody like, hey, isn't it about time that you should be like, moved on from this already? And kind of just allowing them that space to, really talk about it. And, that would be a very big thing. And finally, another tip that I will also say is, and this is something that I often hear from people, is, I'm worried about maybe reaching out for help to somebody and maybe falling apart in front of them.
Okay.
I'm afraid of, maybe mentioning like if somebody has died recently, or it was like a catastrophic loss of some kind. I'm afraid to even name names, know, because I'm afraid that that'll traumatize them. And, one of the most interesting things that you will hear in counseling is people say, I need somebody to just ask me about that person. I want to talk about them.
Right.
And our failure to ask about it is kind of impeding them from doing that, So that is something huge. And number two, if you're somebody who's worried about maybe bringing in your own emotions into it, first of all, there's nothing more powerful than telling somebody through your emotions that you're feeling it, with them, like, wow, this is painful. But of course, I understand that, some people can feel hesitant and say, I don't want that conversation to be about me and my feelings, right? So one of the best recommendations that I can give is think prevention, right? So if you know that on Wednesdays, that's your day to go out and help people, try and do something in anticipation to Wednesday to manage your stress. Right. So however that may look like, listening to relaxing music, setting up boundaries for yourself. Right. Like if you know you're a person that struggles with saying yes to everything, maybe start saying no to certain things so that you can have some time to kind of mentally and emotionally and perhaps even spiritually prepare yourself for a conversation that might, take a lot out of you, and in that, while you're setting boundaries, don't ever underestimate the power of role modeling what it looks like to ask for help. I know so many people who have such a beautiful and giving heart, and they will drop anything and everything. But during the holidays, that's a lot, right? Especially if you have a family, you might be saying no to maybe cooking dinner for your family, and your kids still have to eat. So perhaps, reaching out to a friend of yours and saying like, hey, I know somebody in my life that's struggling, and I need some help this week at home so that I can be there for this person, and kind of showing that to the person that is grieving and letting them know like, hey, I'm reaching out for help, and I want you to know that if you ever need that, you can too. There's no rush in getting to that stage, but if you ever do, that is, that's always an option,
And I was just kind of, as you're sharing these tips, and I was thinking, the holidays can be very busy. And I think there's always an invitation to be still in the holidays and to think of others. I mean, that's kind of like, I feel like that's the Christian walk, is to think of others instead of our own selves, and even put the needs of others before us. And so, and it's such a challenge, right? When we're trying to obviously think through of everything. And if we know of someone that is going through something, I think, first of all, I trust that the Holy Spirit, again, if you follow Jesus, you have the Holy Spirit in you that speaks, that gives you a name. I don't know if you've ever had that happen before, but maybe in your quiet time, in your prayer, just ask, God, is there anyone that I need to reach out to? Is there anyone that needs love? Is there anyone that needs just an ear to listen to, or 2 ears to listen to, right? And just being able to just trust that he's going to give you names to reach out, and that he will equip you with the words, or I think it's like lack of words, because you probably shouldn't be talking and you should probably be listening. Because I think that's obviously a whole nother skill of learning to just
listening.
act. Yeah, listening, the listening skill.
Oh, yeah.
especially when someone else is going through grief. But I think that alone, I just love the image of being able to sit beside someone and even feel emotion with them, and be ears to listen. And even thinking about the name thing, right? Like you don't want to say their name, but like if you're having struggles with that, it's like the person who's grieving, like they want to hear the name.
Totally.
Right? Because it's like it's a mom or a dad or someone that they love, and it's like they want to remember. But it's obviously it's hard.
Yeah, it is. And you can obviously take your cues from the other person, right?
Yes.
Like, if the person has just died,
But-
there's obviously an understanding that perhaps, there can be some wiggle room, right? To only mention that person if the other person is talking about it, right? But when maybe, a couple of weeks have passed by, and I think that's one of the hardest things too, is that especially after the death of a loved one, usually people are all around you, kind of flocking around, bringing you food for like the first week or so.
And then it tapers.
And then life just kind of goes back to normal. Everybody just kind of goes home and like not forgets about it, but kind of like, goes back to work and continues on with their life, while these people that are grieving, family members, loved ones, they're kind of left with this grieving piece and kind of left to pick up the pieces and create a new routine without this, incredible person in their lives. And that can be a really difficult thing, right? So.
Absolutely. So I think we can probably move on to some Q&As.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move into a Q&A. I just want to highlight one thing, if I can. So if you've gone through a divorce, and now you're single and you're kind of work through the holidays, we actually have something here at the church at FAC Calgary on our events and registration called Surviving the Holidays. So I think depending on where you're at in the situation, grieving, a marriage is like, that's a huge grief. So being able to meet with other people, kind of work through that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But we're going to move into a time of Q&A. So you can obviously put them in any chats, YouTube, Facebook, our website. And now we're just going to ask Vanessa anything. Okay.
Fun.
So the first question I have here is, how do you best go about acknowledging the loss someone is feeling without upsetting them too much on Christmas? So how do you best go about acknowledging the loss someone is feeling without upsetting them too much on Christmas?
So I'm assuming this is coming in from somebody else, like not the person that's grieving.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one of the key things that I would probably say with this is, like I said earlier, don't tiptoe around it. If somebody's grieving, one of the easiest ways to maybe acknowledge this loss is to, honestly, a very simple way is to just even send a text message. If you don't even, feel comfortable like calling that person, just simply sending a message and saying like, hey, I know this is your first holiday without this person, and I just want you to know that I'm here, I'm thinking about you, and if you need anything at all, I'm here for you. And sometimes I'll even, I'll recommend to people, like, don't even wait for them to offer. Maybe just say like, hey, I know this is probably going to be a difficult time. I have Wednesday free in the afternoon. Do you mind if I just stop by and chat and see how you're doing? And maybe help you with dinner, or maybe shovel your sidewalk. Oh my gosh, that would be awesome help during the winter. Little things like that, even taking care, if we're talking about somebody that has kids, taking care of the kids for a little while. Just little things like that. You don't necessarily have to have a whole sit down, just a simple message like that. I know this morning I had somebody reach out to me and say, hey, I just want you to know that I prayed for you. And I think that was also such a beautiful way of acknowledging too, like something that is, happening. And I think that that's also something that anybody can easily do, right?
Yep.
Of course, you can also do this in person. Just pop by or make a phone call. But text messages tend to be a really easy thing, right? So
That's good. Thank you. So the next question, do you have some ideas for new traditions to honor memories of loved ones who have passed?
yeah. So this is a very hard one, because I think some of the most meaningful traditions can be ones that, come from the heart and that maybe have something to do with the person that is now no longer with you. So I've heard some awesome ones over the years, like there's one tradition where they said, well, ever since I lost my father, for example, every year now, my family and I gather for Christmas. And, he used to be the person that used to, put the ornaments on the tree. So now we all do it together. And as we're setting an ornament on the tree, we're all kind of going around and sharing stories about our loved one who is no longer with us. And that can be a really nice tradition, where we just sit down and maybe remember them, the good and bad and maybe the hilarious and funny, and kind of, again, talk about it, right? Some other traditions that I've known are, lighting candles. That's a really popular one that I've heard over the years. I had a mom I once heard about who... every year after she lost her son, it was a really, really sad case, she would just always take, 7 minutes in, like during Christmas or a major holiday or anniversary, and she just sat down and lit a candle, for that child. And for that entire duration, while the candle was lit, she would just kind of sit there and think about her child and honor their life. And it kind of varies, right, from person to person. I've also heard some people will sometimes make dishes, so they'll say like, oh, my loved one really loved like apple pie. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So every year now for the holidays, I'm gonna make some apple pie, right? So little things like that.
Thank you. Those are good steps. Then the next question we have here, and thank you for just diving right in. It's awesome. Really appreciate it. What do you do if you have What do you do if you've lost a loved one or going through a hard loss as a family, but some family members refuse to acknowledge it? How can you cope honestly while also not offending them?
Yeah. Like I said in the beginning, right? Grief is personal. And it can look very different from many different people. And one of the hardest parts is exactly that, like some people who might struggle to maybe acknowledge the feeling. It might be a little bit harder, right, to talk about it because they can't even acknowledge what it is that they're feeling. How can they even talk about it? So even in their grief, as hard as it is, sometimes we can also have some grace for those people too and think like, okay, maybe the reason why they can't talk about it is because in a weird way, that escape that they're having, that inability to talk about it is their grief reaction. They're grieving as well. And if you're finding yourself in a position, which is actually very common, by the way, within a family, within a relationship, oftentimes, I've heard this a lot in couples who have recently lost a child. It's very common for for instance, the one partner to have, maybe the Hollywood response to grief, and then the other partner is kind of avoiding the topic altogether. So they're just like escaping through work, escaping through maybe diving in through different activities and just like doing everything they can to kind of like not talk about it. And then there's all this judgment that happens like, oh my gosh, like you're not grieving right. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. So trying to maybe acknowledge that, and within your part, if you're finding yourself like struggling and really yearning for that need to talk about it, while you're waiting for your family to be ready to talk about it, again, reach out. try and think of maybe a friend, a pastor, or potentially even reach out to a mental health professional if you can't think of anybody in your life that you can talk to about this, and talk to them about it. Don't stay quiet. Don't keep things to yourself. In the meanwhile, we can always just kind of wait patiently and maybe pray for them and kind of honor their grieving process as well as your own by kind of addressing the needs that are coming up for you in that moment. I often find that it's very difficult, though. It's easier said than done. We always it's very easy to definitely focus on others than in ourselves.
Fair enough, right?
Grieving, right?
Yeah.
So definitely acknowledging that we can't change people, if it's obviously unfortunate when they have a grief response that maybe kind of clashes with yours. But if you're finding yourself in that position, like I said earlier, one of the biggest tips that I have is just try and think of things that are within your control and focus on those instead of the ones that are outside of your control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is very hard.
It's hard, but it's a good focus for us just to focus on things that we can't control. Yeah. And I don't know, for me, just understanding that grief is so varied from person to person. And if you're going through grief right now, I think it's just acknowledging that it's okay. It's okay to feel the emotion. Yeah. We were talking earlier, Jesus wept. Literally, Emmanuel, God with us. Yeah. The Son of God wept, had tears, felt those emotions.
He did.
Deep emotions. And so I think for us to realize that we don't need to run away from emotions, that we can, as hard as it is, to rest in those emotions and let them, and hopefully find people to come alongside us during the midst of it and reach out for help, like you said. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing with us. I think we're coming into an end here. So really appreciate you coming out to share with our FAC family. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No. I guess I would just like to say thank you to everyone tuning in. And again, if I haven't said this already for the millionth time, seek help if you need it. Don't feel ashamed or scared to do so. There is help out there if you need it. And take care during the holidays.
Yeah, and if you have any other comments or questions, I know we're live right now, but even on the replay, we'd love for you just to reach out, leave comments, and send us a direct message on any of our platforms. We're really here to connect with you, and even we're doing Facebook Live now, but I think. We'd love to obviously continue the conversation because life isn't meant to be lived alone. And so we are here for you. So I think we are wrapping up. So I just want to say, thank you again for joining us. And thank you again, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, friends. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.